Hello, everybody. We have just started a dialogue on social media and how it connects to narcissism. And I wanted to ask you guys, what do you think about social media and affects how it affects narcissism or how it connects?
Well, I thought it was interesting because there's sort of this perception that it is really, really connected, but as we were looking at a couple of the articles, they didn't seem to find a lot of support for that necessarily.
Right, and I agree with your statement, Leah. I felt that they came up with a lot of ideas of how uh, how it affects social media. Being on social media affects how narcissistic people are, but I think a lot more research needs to be done. And so when I was looking at the quiz results, I found out myself that I am fortunately not too narcissistic. I think that I was higher in areas. There were two areas that I was a little bit higher in than other areas. I think they were like vanity and superiority, but I think that um, the time and the place and the time in my life I took that quiz was really indicative of how my responses would be. And some people, certain family members I have might disagree with the results of that quiz. But a couple of the results, I think the first quiz was not as detailed as the second quiz. The second quiz was very detailed. So the second quiz gave us a better idea of what to look for.
Yeah.
So, how did everybody feel about their quiz results?
I would say that mine would be consistent with the way that I kind of perceive myself, because I don't. And going back to the study and that kind of the opening question, I thought it was interesting, and this got brought up in the studies about how you discern the difference between using a platform such as Facebook to keep up with your friends, and so you're posting information, not necessarily like, hey, look at all this stuff I'm doing. It's just like, hey, here's some stuff that's going on. Just wanted to share that with you. Blah, blah, blah. And so as opposed to attention-seeking behavior, as opposed to, hey, I'm just letting everybody know what's going on. We haven't talked to you on the phone or email in quite a while. And it just kind of gives you a way to see what's going on and what things are doing in people's lives, not necessarily as like, oh, hey, look at me and look at all the cool stuff I'm doing. It's just sharing, and about how that's a little bit of a challenge about you get that. It's like splitting those hairs. They're like, what's the difference between narcissistic and what's the difference between just keeping your friends and updated with a web page or sending letters and doing stuff like that, using it as a form of communication. So it was an interesting piece, and so I was curious because I with that first test, it was short, and then I stumbled across that other one, the narcissistic test that they use with those 40 questions, and I was curious, and it was interesting that the shorter quiz provided, although it had less detail, for me it was consistent in the response and the answers. I was like very low narcissistic on both, and so then it made me curious about were other people the same way, or am I thinking about it and I'm really conscious to how I'm responding and generally what a narcissist is, and am I answering that way, or am I really reflecting that way? And so I just thought it was kind of interesting to do both and then run a comparison to see, is there consistency with some of the stuff that's going on with that.
Yeah. And in terms of my results on the test, I think on the 40 question one, I think I scored 3, and they were in the areas of authority and exploitativeness. And that was interesting to me because I thought, well, I mean, I'm in a position of authority as a teacher in a room, so I have to have some kind of acknowledgement that I can do that. So
when you have a leadership position and you have that kind of role, you are going to be a little bit authoritarian, which means you're going to be a little bit narcissistic in that area. It's just, I like how you brought that up. Do you think that social media promotes. As I was reading some of the articles, it talks about how Facebook promotes narcissism. Do you think that social media actually promotes narcissism, or does it just expose people who are already really narcissistic?
My gut would be that it exposes people. I'm not sure that if you didn't have those tendencies that you would develop them. And that'd be actually kind of an interesting thing to study, because it seems like if you were narcissistic, it's a platform like, oh, hey, here's another way that I would do this. So it'd be interesting to see that if the study of narcissistic people what other mediums, or what does it look like outside of the social media, and then just social media just amplified, or here's an additional way that I could do this with technology, because before I was doing it XYZ, as opposed to using this now. So I would be interesting to see. I don't necessarily think that just because you have the social media, you would become narcissistic. My feeling is that those tendencies are already there, and it's just a way to bring them out or further amplify them in a more public sphere.
Yeah,
exactly. That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah, and I was thinking the same way, except when you bring that question down to like preteens or teenagers, how does that affect it as they're developing their personality? If they're sort of immersed in something that does feed a narcissistic personality, and that's part of how they're socializing, does that possibly develop it or establish it as a larger part of their personality overall?
Right, because they're still developing, their personalities are still developing, and they're not really, and they're very impressionable, so they might not be able to maybe have the confidence to do their own thing, and they might just get bogged down in everything that goes around, which I find it interesting how media has changed for a lot of. It's interesting that you bring up the point about teenagers, because they are under a lot of pressure as far as living up to this expectation to be really important right now. Seems like this is aging myself a little bit, but when I was a teenager, there were sitcoms that showed teenagers living this great life, but right now, like Beverly Hills 90210, for an example. But now they have YouTube stars, and they have Instagram stuff, the rich kids of Instagram. So my thought is, how are they going to handle downfalls, and how are they going to handle failure if this is what they see, and they see it more rapidly, and it's all around them a lot more than what I saw them as. So, I mean, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah. And that came up in one of the videos too, like the difference between when you had sitcoms like the Andy Griffith Show or Happy Days versus kind of the Disney-fied perception of what it is to be a teenager now.
It just seems like it's more in their face than ever right now with social media, and how great the lives of other teenagers are. And before, it seemed like it's still a little bit surreal, but now it's just everywhere. It's just in their faces constantly.
I think it raises an interesting point and a broader societal problem about way that when I grew up, and the way that society, and I see in my students today growing up, about the concept about failure, and what does that look like, and what they're trying to do in school now is you don't really learn unless you're failing. And I tell people, like, well, what's your style? How do you teach? I'm like, well, if you're not failing and you're not asking questions, you're not learning, because you've got to go through that, because that's what life is all about. We fail every day. It's just for as an adult now, we've done a lot of it, and we've had to adapt, overcome, improvise. But that's where the real learning has come in. Like, oh, here's this problem. I didn't meet my goal. What do I need to do in order to do that? And so it's some conversations that I've had with some other peers about and this would be at the middle school level because I'm subbing right now across all the different grades. And it's the same thing that they're seeing with their students, and that, and the schools are trying to do that here where I work in Western Colorado about, it's failure is part of the learning process and instilling this idea. But I think collectively or society-wise right now, it is an abstract concept for a lot of people, and they're not used to that because they've been coddled too much. There's too many helicopter parents and stuff like this. Because when I was growing up and something happened, and they're just like, yeah, put some dirt in it and walk it off, just, get over it. And that was the mentality. It's like, okay, it wasn't a big deal. You failed. Okay, so let's get up and get going. But I don't feel like that's in the case for a while, and I see less and less of it. And then we're starting to have to, I think, teach it and model that and demonstrate that to students more and more that it's okay, because if they don't fail, they're not going to learn, and they're not going to be prepared for the society, because in the workforce it's a cold hard dog eat dog world out there.
Yep.
And school, it comes as an eye opener when they get out there in the workforce, and they're like, oh, they're all crying because they fail. Like, dude, get over it, get going, because nobody cares. You've got to get this stuff done, and that's not happening.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. Some of that stuff I think is being reinforced by all this, all look at me and all success. Kids are like, well, I'm going to have to do this because I'm going to be a YouTube star, or I'm going to be, Instagram star, do whatever. And then I go, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
99.999% of all people, end up failure or not being successful. They're not the Jeff Bezos of the world and the Bill Gates and stuff like that. It's just that you're working stiff like the rest of us. And so the sooner you get over that, maybe it'll lead to that, but it takes a lot of effort. It's 80% effort and 20% luck. And they're thinking it's 90% luck and 10% effort. And so it's a mindset. I see this pretty prevalent across, at least 6 through 12.
Yep. I agree. And I see, I will talk to students on a regular basis and ask them, what do you plan on doing in your future? And they, their responses, they always are like, I don't need this. I'm just going to own this this great big company or great big business, or I'm going to be a YouTube star, like you said. But the question is, what are you going to do to get there? And I mean, it's great to be confident, but if you have this attitude that it's just going to be so easy for you, then I'm a little concerned here.
It's kind of like an entitlement piece,
Yes.
Like all these college graduates, like, well, I'm going to go out of college and I'm going to make $40,000 a year in a mid-level executive job, and that's what I deserve because I went to school and I showed up.
Yep.
I go, it doesn't work that way. And I used to be an employer, and I'm glad I'm not one anymore.
Yeah.
Because it has become more and more difficult to find quality people that are willing to work hard, and they don't expect the corner office right off the bat. They're willing to, like, okay, let me start at the bottom and work my way up, and as opposed to no, I'm fresh out of school, so I know everything. And I see more and more of that as I get out and around.
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say that's interesting because you said you work with the older kids, like 6 through 12, and I'm working with the younger kids. My kids are 5th grade, so they're just getting ready to move up. And I had them write letters to people that they admired. And first of all, they didn't even believe that they could actually write a letter and send it to anybody. That was a completely foreign concept to them. But I would say out of all those kids, maybe 5 of them chose YouTubers that they wanted to write to, and they had to have reasons why this person was the best YouTuber or whatever. And it was just really interesting to see their thinking behind, like, why they admired that and why that was something to aspire to.
Yeah, that would be interesting, and the perceptions of younger students, what they want to be or where they want to go when they get older, as opposed to middle school or high school. You kind of see that change where so you had said you had 5. What were some of the other professions that they were or what do they want to be when they grew up?
Well, so they could just write to anybody that they admired or that they thought was the best at something. So a lot of kids wanted to write to people who created video games, which is very close to YouTube. But I also had a handful that wrote to a parent or a family member or something like that. So there was kind of a nice split in the class. I would say like 20% did each area, and then we had a bunch that wrote to athletes. So
nice. Well, they haven't been corrupted yet. wait till they go to 6th grade. Start junior high or middle school.
Yeah, it's coming up.
It's interesting. Yeah, I had a similar assignment at the high school level, and the students talked about how they talked about their biggest influences, and a lot of them did mention YouTube stars, but there were a good number of them that mentioned their moms and dads too. So it's a mix. It's not completely one thing or the other.
Yeah, there's still hope.
Yes, still hope. I was wondering, one question I did have, it was, I guess I was thinking about as I was taking this quiz, have you had taken this quiz at a different point in the narcissistic quiz, at a different point in your life, how would your results have been different?
So that's a good question, and I would say as I was younger, maybe 20 years ago, I would probably be further up on the narcissistic scale, and looking at that. As I've become older, I've become more hermity, reclusey, like I don't really care about any of that stuff. But I think earlier on it tended to be more important. So I wouldn't say that I'd be narcissistic, but I would definitely be higher than where I've scored at before, just thinking about those questions and kind of what was important then and what's important now. And now I know a lot more. I realize I don't know very much. And when I knew less, I realized I thought I knew more. And so, I feel like I'm kind of going the other way.
It's interesting how as you get older, you get more confident in some ways, but then in other ways you get, like when it comes to how you want to lead more, but then you get less narcissistic in other ways. Yeah. Like I think young people, I was commenting on one of the articles and how at Facebook, I think it was Leah, you addressed the fact that a lot of teenagers are not using Facebook as much.
Right.
But I think, and you were wondering about what the new social media, the new next thing for them would be. And I actually responded to your comment that you posted, and I was thinking, right now it seems like Instagram is a really big thing because of the pictures, and they can just all say, look at me, look at what I'm doing. And now they've got these there's a thing with rich kids of Instagram, and they can just look at kids that are like close to their ages but can afford all these fancy cars and great clothes and everything. So that's that was a really interesting post though you made about what do you think the next social media will be, since Facebook is not really so much the thing with them anymore.
Right.
That's more their grandparents thing and their parents thing.
And like I said, I work with the younger kids, so I'm not as in tune with what's really popular. I know that Snapchat was really popular for a while because it went away. They thought it just disappeared. So they could kind of do whatever they wanted because it was supposed to just disappear after a certain amount of time.
Yeah, Snapchat was really big, putting on the cat and dog faces over taking a photo. They would take a photo of themselves and like, oh, look at me when I look like a dog here. So so that was but I haven't heard of Snapchat as much lately.
Really?
I haven't heard about it as much lately. So seems like interactive video games are the thing right now.
Huh.
So what as we're talking about this, is how could you implement the topic of, I think this is a really great topic. I think it was a lot of fun to read about and a lot of fun to take those quizzes. How would you implement this in your own classroom? So both of you guys are teachers, right? How would you implement this in your classroom?
So for me, I'm a teacher, but I'm doing these classes to get my librarian endorsement, which I think is what you're doing as well, Alan?
Yeah. I'll be graduating in May, and then I had a job as a head librarian beginning in August. So.
Oh, cool.
from the classroom to the librarian.
Right. So as like a librarian, it completely fits because you'd want to be doing like digital literacy and making sure that you're covering with the kids aspects of being a good digital citizen and really considering the choices that you're making and how these things do affect the kids and their brains and all of that stuff, and just educating them to help them be aware of that.
Yeah, and that piece, and I don't think that they realized that when we were doing some CMAS testing, and the actual librarian at the middle school where I was working at, they were doing a lesson, about digital citizenship, and they were talking about, once you put it out there on the internet, it's out there forever, right? And so all of a sudden, depending on, and employers use this. The company that my wife works for, they check people's social media and stuff like that, and you have to give them your social media page because they want to see what's going on. They want to see if they aren't. And kids go out and they do stupid stuff without even thinking about it, and then like, oh, that comes back and haunts them a year later. Or employers look at that and go like, why would I want to hire that guy? He's a jerk. Look what's going on. And so they don't realize that piece. And so it's interesting in that, if certain types of media strains, bring out those narcissistic tendencies, it'd be important, I think, for students to like recognize that and wear that and be trying to be metacognitive about that, and then also be thinking about what, as best as you can with younger folks, what are you putting out there online, because these never go away. I mean, it says it disappears, but my understanding is that once stuff is out there, it's out there. And so you have to be very cautious because you don't know who's looking, and you don't know down the road a couple years later if something's going to come back and bite you, because people are willing to freely giving up all this data and information about themselves, and it's used against them. And so I think it tailors into those pieces on all those grades about, okay, look at this, think about this, where you're at, your personality, think about the stuff that you're posting and be aware of this. All right, is this something that you're sharing with friends to keep them updating, or is this attention-seeking behavior because you have this tendency trait and you need to learn to recognize that, which is more challenging down at that age, because attention spans are short, and I think just the way that teenage brain and that young kid brain works. But I think it's something that would be valuable for them over time to get them to realize that and have some experiences with that. And I think ultimately the challenge is with a lot of this stuff that goes on, it's difficult for students unless they have the experience to really make a connection, because you can talk about it, do things. And so the more that you can come up with some scenario, some experience to get them as close to real life as possible, it doesn't really hit home until they have that experience, irregardless of what you're teaching.
Right. Which I think kind of in a certain way connects back to what you were saying, Brianna, about like as you get older, you're less narcissistic. And so what you're trying to develop in the students is the ability to move into that maturity. And so you're trying to give them the tools and the knowledge and the understanding that will help them move beyond those narcissistic tendencies.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I would you give your students this quiz, or either one of the quizzes that we took in this class? I know yours are very young, Leah.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't because they're so young. But
yeah, maybe Alan would.
Yeah, I'd take a hard look at them and see where they would be appropriate. I might use different quizzes for different ages. For juniors and seniors, I think you can get away with a 40 question pretty easy. For younger students, I'd probably use the shorter one. And that was, again, too, is like I was interested in everybody else who took this. Did they get consistent results or did I just happen to do that? Because you don't know whether things are fluke or not. That all 20 of us were consistent with both of them, then you'd have a little more confidence in saying, okay, if I gave this shorter quiz, I have a relatively confident ability to think about these are fairly accurate. These would be consistent with other more scientifically proven tests. Mm-hmm. And then that gives you a better feel. And then you weave that into a lesson and have some conversations with students about that, and then try to make some experience that goes along with that to really be personalized for their situation.
Mm-hmm. I think that this is definitely something that I would give to my students. Well, the year's not over yet, so I can still do that, and then have them write a perspective, write an analysis about it. In an English class, I would use it in English class to write a perspective. Were you surprised by these results? And I have them analyze their own results of this. I think that would be a lot of fun.
It'd be interesting. That's a good idea. Interesting to do that in the form of a social experiment, where you have them do stuff, don't take the test, but you have them start, kind of backdoor into this kind of idea of narcissism. Have them look at their own post and reflect on that. Have them take the test, and then coming back and have them look at it again, like, what were you posting? Why are you posting it? Because then they don't know. Because then if you're like, oh, we're going to take this test about narcissism and stuff like that, then, I always like to do surprise stuff like that, especially when I was teaching econ. We do a lot of simulations, and I just wouldn't tell the students that we would just go do it. And then we'd go back and we'd talk about it. And so, showing the importance, like, this is your behavior. I know that you're going to do this. And I go here, and then I'm going to prove it to you that I'm correct. Because then you have the experience, and then you go back. You don't tell them that. Then you go back and you go through this experience with them, simulation, and then you look at the results and go like, see, this is how you modeled your behavior. This is what I would expect you to do based on this is how most people do these things. And so I think that's a good point that you have. But I'd be interesting to kind of weave it in there so they don't know it's coming. It's just like it moves along in a couple different parts. Let's look at some of the stuff we're posting. Oh, let's learn about narcissism, take the test. Now let's go back and look at what we're posting, and then do like a pre and post and have some discussions about that. But I think that'd be a cool lesson to do.
That would be a great way to extend the assignment too, and see what so they could look back and see what they're posting, and that would probably take more than just one lesson too as well.
Yeah. And not only that, you can have them reflect on them, and then have them reflect on their friends. Are you narcissism? Are your friend narcissistic? And then compare, what are you posting? Are you just trying to keep up with the Joneses or different stuff? I mean, there's a rich field there to play around with.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so what would you guys say that your biggest takeaway from this lesson was? Your brain on social media and narcissism.
So I would say my biggest takeaway was probably just the importance of actually thinking about it and considering it, and not just like we've talked about, not just swimming in the water without being aware of what's going on and how it can affect you and how your personality interacts with all of these different elements of our society.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I would say that, thinking about the different platforms and how they operate and what they do. And then I think it kind of gives you a little more insight about stuff, especially on the Twitter versus Facebook, that research report where, you get the sense that the Twitter was a more accurate outlook of, gauging narcissistic personality, because you didn't have any followers. You didn't have to be friends. You could just go out there and you could go out there and spew your message, and then everybody looks at it. You're not really cared about what's going on, and the pieces. So it was interesting just to think about those different pieces, and then what are you using them, why are you using them, and and then what does it mean when you're dealing with students? So I think it potentially gives you some good insight into what platforms they're using, because what tendencies do you have are amplified through the platforms of social media that you use. So I think it's an interesting kind of takeaway point for me from reading those articles. And there was a couple others. I pulled down those 4, and I actually pulled down 8 or 10. When we were posting up that stuff, and I read through most of them. But those were the ones I thought was kind of interesting, and then the generational difference between the two.
Mm-hmm. And I found this interesting, looking at it from the perspective of how do I score now? How would I have scored when I was a teenager? So looking at it, I was looking at it from a teenage perspective, and I was looking at it from an adult perspective. So I was trying to get these various perspectives, and I thought, to myself, wow, this would be a great lesson and a great thing to use in the classroom. So I found it to be a very fun topic, and I'm glad that we touched base with it.
Yeah, I think it was good.
Okay. So